Hi everyone, I'm Alex Hall. I'm a family doctor and a biology instructor, and a lot of friends and family have been asking me how the new mRNA COVID-19 vaccines work. And so I thought I'd put together a little video to explain it because this is newer science to most of us and it's really fascinating. So here we go. Yesterday, no, 2 days ago, I got my first COVID-19 vaccine, and I am so excited to be on my way to developing immunity against this infection that has caused so much devastation in our country and around the world. So, what happened, right? So, they injected the vaccine into my arm, right? So, using a syringe, they injected it into my arm. Let's take a look a little bit deeper. So there it is. You can see this little yellow glob. Here's the vaccine sitting in the deltoid muscle of my arm, right? So the vaccine got delivered through the injection. And then you might well wonder, well, like what's actually in these vaccines? What does it do? How does it actually work to help protect us from COVID-19? So that's what we're going to talk about. So these vaccines are made of mRNA in lipid nanoparticles. That doesn't sound very clear, does it? So let's break that down. So you may remember RNA in relationship to DNA from your biology courses. So DNA is the genetic material, the genetic code that makes up our genes and our chromosomes and resides in the nucleus of our cells and has all the instructions for our cells to make all the things that they need to make, and it ends up determining so many of our characteristics, right? From our hair color to our eye color to how tall we're going to be or how likely we are to have heart disease or any number of things. Now, RNA is kind of, in some ways, DNA's poor cousin because it's a smaller molecule by about half. It's otherwise fairly similar, but RNA is used for certain specific tasks. And the important one that we're going to talk about today is that RNA actually serves as an instructional code for cells. Specifically, it tells them how to make different types of proteins. And then those proteins, by either serving as enzymes that allow certain chemical reactions to happen, or by being pigments or structural components, then go on to cause all of the things in our body that need to happen. So we're going to focus just on the RNA. So that's what RNA is, mRNA specifically. It's this instructional code that tells cells how to make certain proteins. So the thing about RNA, so here's a whole bunch of little RNAs that I've put together, is that it's a really fragile molecule. It will degrade very quickly. And so in an effort to protect it, what the vaccine manufacturers have done is put it in a suspension of little tiny droplets of fats or lipids, right? So fats and oils, lipid is just the fancy name for that. So they've kind of surrounded it with these little tiny bits of fats and oils that then protect the RNA. Now, you've also heard that these vaccines require very cold temperatures often, and so that's another piece of why these vaccines are a little different, because they just contain RNA in a little bit of fat or oil to keep it stable and allow it to be administered. So this little bundle, this little puddle of RNA in those lipid nanoparticles has been delivered into my muscle 2 days ago. So what happened? Well, very quickly after I received my vaccine, right, those lipid nanoparticles and mRNA particles, molecules, entered my cells. Right? So they went right into my cells because lipids do that really easily, moved right across the cell membranes to the inside of my cells. So what's going to happen then, right? So RNA is a molecule that tells a cell how to make a protein. So those RNA molecules go to the protein factory part of my cell, which you might remember from biology class are ribosomes and the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Don't worry if you don't remember. And then those protein factories are going to start to make the protein that's coded for, right, in that specific type of RNA. Right, so they're going to make these proteins, which I've used this little red shape to designate, and then start secreting those proteins out of the cell. Now, these vaccine mRNA molecules code specifically for the spike protein, which is normally found on the surface of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID-19. So if you've seen these images of this virus that look kind of like this, right, with all these spiky things hanging off of it, those are the spike proteins, right? They're kind of like bling for the virus, but they also serve a functional role in the virus's ability to attach to our cells and infect them. So this is a really important protein component of the virus. So what's really cool here is that the RNA is telling our cells to make just this spike protein, no other parts of the virus. And the spike protein in and of itself can't do anything. So the really cool thing here is that this vaccine, you cannot get infected with COVID from the COVID mRNA vaccines, right? We've had some vaccines in the past where you could perhaps maybe get a little infection from them, but you can't with this. Also, the RNA doesn't enter our DNA at all. So I know there's been some concern that since this is genetic material, it could somehow get into our DNA and change our genes. That actually can't happen. RNA is something that even our own cells use as instructions for how to make proteins. And so this is a molecule that our cells are full of all of the time, just not with this specific code or set of instructions, right? This is a new set of instructions. Pretty cool. So that spike protein then gets created by our own cells and released out of the cells, where then immune cells, of which we have various different types, can see it. And then immune cells, their job is basically to know everybody in the body. Their job is to know what every cell looks like and what every molecule that's normally present in our body looks like. And so if they see something that's different, then all of a sudden they raise the alarm, right? They're like, uh-oh, there's something here that is not us, okay? And so they're going to activate the immune system and say, this is a foreign invader, we need to attack it. So when the immune system gets to work, we have all these different types of cells that are going to do different types of things. Some immune cells are going to just gobble up the spike protein and eat it up, right? Some are going to release special kinds of chemicals to fight it, right, in various ways. And these two reactions that happen as part of our normal immune response cause many of the short-term symptoms and side effects that we see with vaccines, right? It's a result of this normal process that your arm gets really sore. So in my case, my arm was a little bit sore right after the vaccine, got quite a bit more sore kind of that night and the next day. And now today, 2 days later, it's only a little bit sore to the touch, right? So that arm soreness is part of this. The other thing that can happen is that as these chemicals are released that kind of activate the immune system in more broad ways, you can get a fever or chills. I'm pretty sure I had a fever the night after I got the vaccine. You can feel a little woozy or weird, get some body aches or joint pains, headache, fatigue. Those things are common, and they are side effects of your immune system being activated. The other thing that our immune system is going to do is it's going to start a training program. And this is the really important part. This is where the money is. So it's going to start to train other immune cells in certain ways. It's going to teach them about this spike protein and how to recognize it. And some of those cells, it's going to teach them to become assassins. Like we literally have cells called killer T cells that will learn how to just attack and assassinate any cell that has that spike protein on it. Some other immune cells will learn to produce antibodies against that spike protein. And you've probably heard about antibodies through all this COVID pandemic. And antibodies, you can almost think of them like guided or targeted missiles, right? So molecules that we use that kind of seek out and glom onto something that we've identified as a foreign invader, in this case, that spike protein. The other thing that our immune cells are going to learn how to do is to remember this spike protein. We have cells called memory B cells, and their job is to remember this spike protein in case it ever shows up again. So this part of our immune system's response to seeing this foreign spike protein, this is why we're doing the vaccination, right? This is what's going to protect us in the future against anything that has this spike protein on it, because now our immune system is forewarned and forearmed and ready to hit the ground running if it ever sees it again. Now, I want to point out this process takes time the first time around. It can take a week or 2 weeks to develop antibodies. And so the first time you ever get exposed to a germ, sometimes you get really sick as that germ multiplies throughout your body before you're able to mount a full immune response, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to shorten that time so we're ready to hit the ground running. So all vaccines work this way by giving us advanced training for how to recognize and fight a germ, so that if we do encounter it in real life, we're ready to go, right? So now our immune cells have been trained. They know exactly what to do. So if that spike protein shows up again, they're going to hit the ground running. They're going to go after it. They may be so effective, right? They may shut that infection down right at the beginning, so we may never get sick at all. Or if we do get sick, we might be only very mildly ill because the virus, in this case, hasn't had a chance to kind of multiply out of control. These mRNA vaccines are a really significant advance that's actually been based on more than a decade of scientific and medical research. So people have been working on this avenue of vaccination for a long time, and it's built upon a lot of discoveries we've made in the past 2 decades. And the really slick thing about mRNA vaccines is that they allow us to train the immune system to recognize the spike protein in this case, without having to use the actual virus itself. So previous vaccine technologies required us to grow virus, right, potentially dangerous and infectious virus, in laboratories, in cells, because you can't grow them usually in just a petri dish, with very specific conditions, and it took a lot of time, and it was very resource intensive and very difficult. And then we had to figure out a way to either kill off the virus so we could give somebody dead virus in the vaccine, or attenuate it in some way, make it weaker and less able to cause illness. So whereas before we always had to give people kind of whole virus, right, be it inactivated or weakened or killed, so that their immune system could learn what it looked like. Now we're able to just show, here's this part of this virus. And that seems to be enough for our immune system to then be able to effectively fight off the whole virus if it's presented with it as an actual exposure or potential infection. There are a lot of advantages to mRNA as a way of, people talk about it as a platform, right? As a way of creating a vaccine. One is we have technology now where creating a string of RNA is relatively easy. It's almost like making a recipe in your kitchen, right? So you add the reagents in the right amounts at the right times, and voila, you have the RNA that you need. So it's much easier and faster to produce than having to grow virus in cells over many months, which is a really labor-intensive process. The other cool thing about it is because of some of the technology that we have now, if we need to modify this, if the virus mutates in a significant way that changes the shape of the spike protein, for example, in a significant way, we can easily tweak the RNA that's in the vaccine. So that's really cool too, right? If needed. And so far, it doesn't seem to be needed based on the variants, including the new UK variant that we're seeing spreading in the world. The other advantage is that they seem to be safer, right? You can't get the infection from this vaccine because it's just one little part of the virus, which by itself is completely incompetent. Also, there's no preservatives. There are no chemicals that were used to kill off the virus that might be still present in small amounts. There's no adjuvants, which are something that sometimes we need to add to other vaccines to kind of prod the immune system to take it seriously and get into gear. So these vaccines actually seem to be much safer. They're much simpler. They're very elegant. It's a very smart way to teach the immune system to be ready for a potential specific invader. Sometimes people are worried that these vaccines haven't been out for very long. I hear you. That's always a cause for concern. I feel reassured by two things. One is that from a hypothetical, kind of theoretical standpoint, there is not reason to think that these vaccines would be harmful. Now, I also am one who's lived long enough to know sometimes you don't think it's going to be a problem, but it turns out to be. So far, the safety data on the vaccines is excellent. It seems to be really well tolerated. Significant or dangerous side effects are really rare and mostly confined to just severe allergic reactions in people who have a history of severe allergic reactions, like the kind where you need to carry an EpiPen. We call that anaphylaxis. That's also a treatable reaction. So far, so good. And certainly from what we've seen, getting the vaccine is much safer statistically than actually getting the COVID-19 infection. So in summary, I just want to leave you with a few points, right? So the vaccine mRNA, the way it works is it tells our cells to make the spike protein that's normally found on the outside of the COVID-19 virus. And our immune system learns how to recognize and attack the spike protein so it's prepared and ready to go if it shows up again. This way, right, we're totally ready so that if we get exposed to the virus, we fight it off effectively and immediately. We don't have to wait for that training process to occur. A few final things about the vaccine that bear mentioning. 2 doses are needed to get to that 95% effectiveness against symptomatic infection that we're seeing, and significant side effects are very rare. So far, 2 days out, I'm doing great, and I'm looking forward to getting my next vaccine in 3 weeks. That's it. I hope this was helpful. If it was, please feel free to share with your friends and family. Take care, continue to wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands, and keep your family and community safe.